Captain Adrian Voss had spent years patrolling the fringe of human-colonized space, a job that was rarely as exciting as it sounded. His ship, the Horizon, was a sturdy cargo freighter turned patrol vessel, built more for endurance than combat. Like most days, he sipped a lukewarm cup of synth coffee, bored out of his mind, as he stared into the endless stretch of stars outside the viewport. It had been a quiet few months since any major incidents, just routine scouting for debris, illegal trade routes, and the occasional pirate. The usual hum of the ship and the vast emptiness of space had lulled Adrian into a trance when a shrill beep shattered the stillness. His hands instinctively flew to the controls as the radar pulsed with an incoming signal. "Distress beacon," he muttered, pulling up the details on his monitor. His brows furrowed in confusion. The signature was unfamiliar. It wasn't from any human ship or alliance he recognized. Adrian's curiosity piqued, and he initiated a scan. The result caused his heart to jump. It was an alien vessel, badly damaged and drifting just outside an asteroid field. "Well, this is new," he said to himself as he altered the Horizon's course to intercept the signal. As the freighter approached, the alien ship came into view, sleek and futuristic, but battle-worn. Deep plasma scars covered its hull, and sections of it vented gas into space. The ship looked like it had barely survived a brutal fight. "AI, lifeform scan," Adrian commanded. The ship's AI, a calm female voice named Tess, responded almost immediately. "One lifeform detected. Condition critical." Adrian's gut churned. He knew protocol dictated calling for backup, but this alien was in serious danger. By the time help arrived, they'd be too late. Ignoring the unease growing in his chest, Adrian made a decision. "Tess, prepare the docking bay." Moments later, the freighter was locked onto the alien ship, and Adrian suited up for an emergency rescue. As he stepped into the airlock, the eerie silence of the alien vessel engulfed him. The interior was both beautiful and strange, with smooth, organic designs and faint glowing symbols lining the walls. Following the lifeform signal, Adrian navigated through the dark, dimly lit corridors until he reached the cockpit. His breath caught as he found the source of the signal. Slumped in the pilot seat was a young alien girl, her skin a soft shade of silver with deep cuts and burns marring her fragile form. Her long, dark hair floated weightlessly in the zero-gravity environment, and her breathing was shallow, barely there. Adrian wasted no time. Gently, he scooped the alien girl into his arms, her weight almost non-existent, and hurried back to the Horizon. Once inside the medbay, he quickly activated the automated systems. Oxygen, stabilizers, and a cocktail of emergency medical interventions worked to keep her alive. His hands shook slightly as he monitored her condition. Her pulse was weak, but steadying. After what felt like an eternity, she stirred, her violet eyes blinking open in confusion and fear. She looked at Adrian, her gaze piercing, but unable to hold consciousness for long. She drifted back into darkness before she could utter a single word. Adrian leaned against the wall, staring at the mysterious girl. "Who are you?" he whispered, feeling the weight of something much larger than himself pressing down on his shoulders. This wasn't just a random rescue. This girl had a story, and it was clear from the damage to her ship that whatever she had been running from was terrifying, and likely still hunting her. The hours after Adrian had brought the alien girl aboard passed in agonizing silence. He paced the corridors of the Horizon, glancing back at the medbay every few minutes. His mind raced with questions. Who was she? Why was she alone, drifting in a wrecked ship? And most importantly, what was she running from? Just as he started to feel the weight of exhaustion settle in, the ship's AI interrupted his thoughts. "Captain, the life form in the medbay is regaining consciousness." Adrian's heart leaped. He rushed to the medbay, finding the alien girl stirring. Her eyes, large and luminous, opened slowly. She blinked, taking in her surroundings. The wariness in her expression was unmistakable, but there was also relief when her gaze landed on Adrian. "Hey," Adrian said softly, holding up his hands in a gesture of peace. "You're safe now. I found your ship drifting. You were badly hurt." The girl sat up slowly, grimacing in pain as she did. Adrian quickly moved to help her, but she waved him off with a weak smile. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft but clear and strangely melodic. "You saved me." Adrian nodded, leaning back against the medbay wall. "Just doing what I could. My name's Adrian, by the way." "What's yours?" She hesitated, as if considering whether or not to trust him. After a moment, she spoke. "My name is Kaya. I'm from the planet Velaris, but it doesn't exist anymore." Adrian frowned, confused. "What do you mean it doesn't exist?" Kaya's eyes darkened as she stared at the floor. "The Sinar. They destroyed it. My home, my people, all gone." The name sent a chill through Adrian. He had heard rumors of the Sinar, brutal alien race known for their conquest of entire star systems. If they were after Kaya, this was bigger than anything he had ever dealt with. "They've been hunting me ever since," Kaya continued, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and fear. "I have something they want, something I stole from their leader before I escaped." Adrian's stomach dropped. He had a sinking feeling that by saving her, he had unknowingly placed himself directly in the path of whatever danger she carried with her. "What did you steal?" he asked, his voice low, barely a whisper. Kaya reached into a small pouch at her side and pulled out a glowing crystal, no bigger than a fist. It pulsed with an eerie, otherworldly light. "This," she said quietly, "the heart of Velaris. It's the key to unimaginable power. And if the Sinar get their hands on it, they'll destroy countless worlds." Adrian stared at the crystal, realizing the full gravity of the situation. He had just walked into something far more dangerous than he could have imagined. And now, there was no turning back. Adrian couldn't tear his eyes away from the glowing crystal in Kaya's hand. The heart of Velaris. It seemed too small, too delicate to hold such devastating power. And yet, the gravity of her words hung heavy in the air. "The Sinar are relentless," Kaya whispered, her voice shaky. "They'll never stop hunting me as long as I have this." Adrian felt a shiver run down his spine. The Sinar were more than just conquerors. They were a scourge that left nothing but ruin in their wake. And now, they were on his trail as well. "We need to get rid of it," Adrian said after a moment, his voice firm. "If they're coming for this, then we need to hide it, destroy it, if we can." Kaya shook her head, her grip tightening around the crystal. "You don't understand. The heart is more than just a weapon. It's the last piece of my people's legacy. If I destroy it, destroy the only thing left of Velaris. Besides, I can't. It's indestructible." Adrian ran a hand through his hair, frustration building. "Then what? You plan on running forever? Because as long as you have that thing, we're both targets." "I don't want to run," Kaya replied, her voice stronger now. "But I need to find a way to use it against them. The heart holds a power that could stop the Sinar, but I don't know how to unlock it yet." Adrian glanced at her, his skepticism clear. "You think you can take on the Sinar with this thing?" Kaya met his gaze, determination flashing in her luminous eyes. "I don't have a choice." Before Adrian could respond, the ship's AI interrupted once again. "Captain, multiple vessels are approaching. They match the signature of Sinar ships." Adrian's blood ran cold. "How long until they're in range?" 3 minutes, the AI replied. "Their weapons are armed." Adrian's mind raced. 3 minutes. Not enough time to jump to hyperspace. Not enough time to outrun them. They had to fight, but the horizon wasn't built for combat, and against Sinar ships, they didn't stand a chance. Kaya's face went pale as the AI's words sank in. "They found me." Adrian stood up, his expression grim. "No, They found us. He dashed to the cockpit, Kaya following closely behind. The control panels lit up with warnings as the Sinner ships closed in. Adrian's hands flew across the controls, trying to calculate their next move. "We need a plan. Fast," Adrian muttered under his breath. He glanced at Kaya. "Do you know anything about their ships? Weak spots, something we can use?" Kaya swallowed hard, her mind racing. "Their shields are strong, but they take time to recharge after a hit. If you can time it right, we might get a chance to strike." Adrian nodded, focusing on the task ahead. "Greta," he called to the AI, "prep the ship's weapon systems. Target their shields the moment we're in range. We've got one shot at this." The Horizon wasn't outfitted for heavy combat, but it had enough firepower to cause some damage if they timed everything perfectly. As the first Sinner vessel appeared on the radar, Adrian gripped the controls tightly. "They're locking onto us," Kaya said, her voice tense. Adrian exhaled slowly, his heart racing. "Greta, fire now." The ship's cannons blazed, sending a volley of energy blasts toward the closest Sinner ship. The shields shimmered for a brief moment before flickering, leaving a small window of vulnerability. "Now, hit them again," Adrian shouted. The second blast hit its mark, but the Sinner ship barely faltered. It was damaged, but still operational. Worse yet, the other two ships were closing in fast, and their weapons were charging. "We need to jump," Kaya urged, panic rising in her voice. "We can't win this fight." Adrian clenched his jaw. "We're not jumping anywhere until I figure out where to go." The ship shook violently as the Sinner vessels returned fire, their plasma cannons lighting up the black void of space. Alarms blared through the cockpit, and Adrian struggled to keep the Horizon steady. "Shields at 60%, Greta reported. Adrian cursed under his breath. They were outgunned, outnumbered, and out of options. Every instinct told him to flee, but he couldn't just leave Kaya to face them alone. Not after everything she had told him. "Greta, prepare a blind jump," Adrian ordered. It was risky. Jumping without precise coordinates could send them anywhere, into the heart of a star or worse, but it was the only option left. Kaya's eyes widened. "A blind jump? That's suicide. Better than waiting here to die." Adrian shot back. "We're out of time." The Sinner ships closed the distance, and Adrian knew they were moments away from being blown apart. He locked eyes with Kaya, who nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. "Greta, engage the jump, now." The stars outside the viewport stretched into long streaks of light as the Horizon tore through space, the ship shuddering violently as it entered hyperspace. Adrian held his breath, praying the engines wouldn't fail them now. For a few heart-pounding moments, there was only the deafening hum of the ship's drive and the disorienting blur of stars outside. Then, suddenly, everything went still. They had made it. They were alive. Adrian let out a long breath, slumping back in his seat. Kaya sat down beside him, her face pale but relieved. "That was close," she murmured, still gripping the heart of Velaris tightly. Adrian gave a half-hearted chuckle, shaking his head. Too close. But the relief was short-lived. As they floated in the silence of deep space, far from any known system, the weight of their situation settled in. The Sinner weren't going to stop. They would find them again, and next time, they might not be so lucky. "What now?" Kaya asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Adrian stared out into the vast, empty expanse of space. They were alone, lost, and hunted. But even as the enormity of the challenge ahead weighed on him, a spark of determination lit in his chest. "We find a way to stop them," Adrian said quietly. "And we make sure the Sinner never get their hands on that crystal." Kaya looked at him, surprised by the resolve in his voice. "We fight," he added, his gaze hardening. "And we survive." The Horizon drifted silently through the vast, uncharted sector of space. Adrian sat in the dim light of the cockpit, his mind racing with possibilities. They had managed to escape the Sinner for now, but it was only a matter of time before they tracked them again. The blind jump had bought them some time, but no clear direction. Kaya stood by the viewport, her expression distant as she stared into the stars. The heart of Velaris still glowed faintly in her hand, casting soft, eerie light across her face. It was more than just a relic of her past. Hadrian could see that now. It was a curse. Beacon that drew destruction wherever it went. "I don't know how long we can keep running," Kaya said quietly, breaking the silence. "We need help." Hadrian leaned forward in his chair, considering her words. "Help from who? I don't know anyone crazy enough to take on the Sonar." Kaya turned to him, her expression firm. "I do." Hadrian raised an eyebrow. "Who?" "There's someone who can help us," Kaya said, her voice measured. "He's a former ally of my people. Powerful figure in the underworld, someone with resources and connections." Hadrian frowned. "An ally in the underworld? That sounds more like a trap than a solution." Kaya shook her head. "His name is Rika Thorn. He was a friend of my father's, a smuggler and a weapons dealer. He owes my family a debt, and if anyone can help us, it's him." Hadrian's gut instinct told him this was a bad idea. The criminal underworld was dangerous territory to navigate, and trust was hard to come by. But what other choice did they have? They couldn't fight the Sinner on their own, and they couldn't keep running forever. "Where can we find him?" Hadrian asked, crossing his arms. Kaya hesitated, then answered. "He operates out of the Lagrange system on a planet called Zereth. It's a hive of smugglers, mercenaries, and outlaws. But Rika, he controls it all." Hadrian nodded slowly. The name Zereth rang a bell. He had heard of it in passing, mostly from other pilots who warned him to steer clear. A lawless planet in the Outer Rim, ruled by crime lords and bounty hunters. Not exactly a welcoming place, but Rika Thorn sounded like their best shot. Maybe their only shot. "All right," Hadrian said, standing up. "Set the course. But just so you know, if this Rika turns on us, I'm not going down without a fight." Kaya gave him a small, appreciative smile. "Neither am I." The journey to the Lagrange system was tense. Hadrian remained on high alert, constantly scanning for any sign of the Sinner ships. But for the first time in what felt like ages, they were alone. No pursuit, no threats on the radar. Yet the quiet only made him more uneasy. As they neared Zereth, the ship's AI chimed in. "Captain, we are approaching the planet. Scanners indicate multiple vessels in orbit, including several heavily armed ships." Hadrian glanced at Kaya. "Looks like your friend has quite the security detail." "He's careful," Kaya replied. "And with good reason." The horizon descended through the planet's atmosphere, cutting through thick layers of smog and clouds. Zereth was a bleak world, its surface covered in sprawling, rusted cities and industrial complexes. Fires burned in the distance, and the sky was a perpetual shade of gray. Hadrian guided the ship toward the coordinates Kaya had given him, landing in a private docking bay at the edge of one of the larger city sectors. The bay was empty except for a few cargo ships and security drones. As the ship's landing gear touched down, Hadrian powered off the engines and glanced at Kaya. "You ready for this?" She nodded, though there was a tension in her expression that hadn't been there before. "Stay close. Rika's men can be unpredictable." Hadrian raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. He checked his sidearm, making sure it was secure before they disembarked. The docking bay doors hissed open, and Hadrian and Kaya stepped out into the stale, metallic air of Zereth. A group of armed mercenaries awaited them, their weapons holstered but their eyes sharp with suspicion. At their head stood a tall man with graying hair and a scar that ran down the side of his face. His expression was unreadable as he looked Kaya and down. Well, the man said, his voice low and gravelly. "Kaya Velaris, of all people. Never thought I'd see you again. Rika, Kaya said, her tone cautious. I need your help. Rika Thorne smirked, folding his arms across his chest. Help, huh? You show up out of the blue after all these years, and now you need my help. Typical. Hadrian watched the exchange closely, his hand hovering near his blaster. Rika's men stood at attention, clearly waiting for a signal from their boss. This could go south fast. I'm calling in the debt you owe my father, Kaya said, her voice steady, but with an edge of steel. I saved your life once. Now I need you to return the favor. Rika's smirk faded, and his eyes narrowed. You've got some nerve, kid. He took a step closer, looming over her. But you're in luck. I'm a man of my word. Kaya held his gaze, unflinching. Good, because if you help me, you'll be saving more than just me. Rika's gaze flicked to Adrian, then back to Kaya. What's this about? Kaya hesitated for a moment, then reached into her pouch and pulled out the heart of Velaris. The crystal's light cast a faint glow over the grimy walls of the bay, catching the attention of Rika and his men. Rika's eyes widened. Is that what I think it is? Kaya nodded. The Sinner destroyed my home, my people. And now, they're hunting me for this. We need to stop them, Rika, but we can't do it alone. For a long, tense moment, Rika stared at the crystal, his expression unreadable. Then, finally, he let out a low chuckle. Well, kid, you sure know how to make things interesting. He glanced at his men, then back at Kaya and Adrian. All right, I'll help you, but this isn't going to be easy. The Sinner have eyes everywhere, and if they catch wind of what you're carrying, we're all dead. Hadrian stepped forward, his voice firm. We know the risks. We're in this until the end. Rika nodded, a dangerous glint in his eyes. Good. Then let's get to work. As Rika led them deeper into the heart of the city, Hadrian couldn't shake the feeling that they had just made a deal with the devil. But if it meant a fighting chance against the Sinner, he was willing to take that risk. One way or another, this fight was just beginning. Zareth's underworld had its own rhythm, a dark pulse that hummed through the streets and alleys. As Adrian and Kaya followed Rika through the city, the atmosphere shifted. The deeper they went, the more oppressive it became. Neon lights flickered overhead, casting distorted shadows on the grimy walls. The air was thick with the scent of oil, sweat, and smoke, a far cry from the clean, sterile environments Adrian was used to in space. Rika led them to an unmarked building, its exterior crumbling, but clearly fortified. Guards flanked the entrance, eyeing Adrian and Kaya suspiciously. Rika flashed them a nod, and they stepped aside, granting entry. Inside, the air was cooler, the din of the city muffled behind thick walls. This is where we'll talk, Rika said, gesturing toward a dimly lit room. It was furnished with a long metal table, scattered with holomaps, weaponry, and data slates. A few figures hovered around, speaking in hushed tones. Mercenaries, Adrian assumed. Hardened types, ready to jump into action at a moment's notice. Rika motioned for them to sit, taking a seat himself at the head of the table. He leaned back, watching Kaya carefully. All right, let's hear it. What exactly are we dealing with, and how do you expect to stop them? Kaya placed the heart of Velaris on the table, its light casting long, eerie shadows across the room. The mercenaries in the room shifted, eyes drawn to the strange, pulsing glow. Hadrian noticed their discomfort, their unease at being in the presence of something so foreign, so powerful. The Sinner, Kaya began, her voice steady but laced with the weight of her people's tragedy. They've been after this ever since they obliterated Velaris. The heart is more than just a symbol. It's a power source, one that can enhance their weapons, their ships, even their own soldiers. Rika's expression hardened. Power source, huh? No wonder they want it so badly. Kaya nodded. It's not just any power source. It's tied to Velaris itself, our history, our energy. In the wrong hands, it can destroy entire systems. And they know how to use it. Hadrian felt a chill. He'd known this was dangerous, but the scope of it was dawning on him in full now. "So what's the plan?" he asked. "We can't outrun them forever." Kaya glanced at Adrian, then back to Rika. "There's an ancient Valorian temple, hidden deep within a nebula not far from here. It's where the heart was originally kept, guarded by my ancestors for millennia. If we can reach it, we can activate the heart's defenses, sealing it away forever. The sinner won't be able to touch it." Rika drummed his fingers on the table, thinking. A hidden temple in a nebula sounds like the stuff of legends. "You sure it's real?" Kaya's eyes were fierce. "It's real. My father told me about it before." She trailed off, swallowing hard before continuing. "Before they came." Rika leaned back in his chair, letting out a long breath. "All right, say I believe you. You think this temple's defenses can stop the Sonar. Even if we make it there, they'll be right on our tails." "That's why we need your help," Kaya said, her voice more urgent now. "You have the ships, the firepower. With your resources, we can get there before the Sonar catch up. We just need time." Hadrian watched Rika closely. He could see the gears turning in the smuggler's head. Rika wasn't the kind of man to jump into something without calculating the risks. But he was also someone who valued debts, and Kaya had called in a big one. Rika stood up, pacing around the table. "This won't be easy. I can provide the ships, but you need to understand something. Once we're in that nebula, communication and navigation will be a nightmare. The Sonar will come at us with everything they've got. You'd better be damn sure this temple's defenses are enough to stop them. Because if they're not, we're all dead." "I'm sure," Kaya said firmly. "This is the only way." Hadrian exhaled slowly. They were committing to this path, and there was no turning back. He glanced at Kaya, seeing the resolve in her eyes. Despite everything, her fear, her loss, she was determined to see this through. He admired that. Rika turned to his men, barking orders. "Prepare the fleet. We leave in 12 hours." The mercenaries scattered, moving with practiced efficiency. Hadrian and Kaya stood, following Rika toward the exit. As they reached the door, Rika paused, looking back at Kaya. "You know," he said quietly, "I liked your father. He was a good man. I'm doing this because of him, but don't think for a second that I'm doing it for free. If we pull this off, we're square." Kaya nodded. "Understood." Hours later, the Horizon flew in formation with Rika's fleet, a ragtag group of heavily modified ships, each bristling with weapons. Hadrian couldn't help but feel a sliver of doubt. Would they really be able to fend off the Sonar? Even with Rika's fleet, they were still outgunned by a force that had wiped out entire civilizations. Kaya stood at the viewport, staring out at the stars as they approached the nebula. She hadn't said much since the meeting, her thoughts clearly elsewhere. "You okay?" Hadrian asked, stepping up beside her. She didn't turn to face him, but nodded slowly. "I'm just trying to prepare myself. This place, it's all that's left of my people. If we fail..." Adrian placed a hand on her shoulder. "We won't fail." Kaya finally looked at him, her expression softening just a little. "Thank you, Adrian, for everything." Before he could respond, the ship's proximity alarms blared. "Captain," the AI's voice crackled through the cockpit speakers. "Multiple vessels approaching fast. Sinner ships." Hadrian's heart sank. They were here. As the Sinner ships appeared on the horizon, sleek and menacing, Rika's fleet prepared for battle. Hadrian gripped the controls, his mind racing. The heart of Valorous pulsed faintly in Kaya's hand as she stood beside him, her face set with determination. "This is it," she whispered. Hadrian nodded, his fingers tightening around the controls. "Let's make it count." The battle for the heart of Valorous was about to begin. The Sinner fleet burst from hyperspace like a swarm of predatory creatures, their ships sleek and angular, designed for speed and lethality. Their engines glowed ominously in the dark void, a stark contrast to the vibrant, swirling gases of the nebula they approached. They wasted no time, moving into attack formation almost immediately. Adrian watched from the cockpit of the Horizon, his fingers twitching on the controls. His heart pounded, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. Rika's ragtag fleet was already shifting into defensive positions, forming a protective perimeter around the Horizon. But they were outnumbered, badly. "Here we go." Rika's voice crackled through the cum. His tone was steady, but Adrian could hear the tension underneath. "All ships, prepare for incoming fire." Kaya stood behind Adrian, clutching the heart of Velaris tightly. The crystal pulsed in her hands, its glow synchronizing with the rhythm of her heartbeat. She didn't say a word, but Adrian could feel the pressure building inside her. This was it, the moment everything had led to. "They're scanning us," Kaya said, her voice low, as she watched the Sinar ships through the viewport. "They know we have the heart." Adrian's eyes narrowed. "Let's give them a fight they won't forget." As the first wave of Sinar fighters closed in, the stars outside were suddenly ablaze with laser fire. Explosions rippled across the dark expanse as Rika's fleet opened up, a barrage of energy cannons and missiles streaking through the void. The Sinar ships responded in kind, unleashing a hailstorm of plasma beams and torpedoes that illuminated the nebula in a deadly light show. The Horizon shook violently as a Sinar fighter swept past, firing a burst of plasma shots that narrowly missed their hull. Adrian's hands flew over the controls, jerking the ship into evasive maneuvers. The inertial dampeners struggled to keep up, but he managed to dodge the incoming fire. "We've got two on our tail," Adrian called out, his voice tight with concentration. "I see them," Kaya replied, her gaze locked on the tactical display. "Coming around for another pass." "Hold on," Adrian muttered, pushing the ship into a tight barrel roll. The Horizon spun through the chaos of the battle, weaving between enemy fire and debris. The two Sinar fighters stayed locked onto them, closing in fast. "Now," Kaya shouted. Adrian slammed the controls forward, sending the Horizon into a steep dive toward the planet's surface below. The Sinar fighters followed, undeterred, but as they closed the distance, Rika's ships intercepted, cutting across their flight path and firing a barrage of missiles. One of the Sinar fighters exploded in a brilliant flash of light, but the second managed to evade the attack, still in pursuit. "We need to shake them," Adrian growled, glancing at Kaya. "Can you do anything with that thing?" Kaya looked down at the heart, the crystal pulsing brighter now as the battle intensified. "I don't know. It's not like I have a manual," she said, a hint of frustration in her voice, "but I can try." She closed her eyes, focusing on the heart in her hands. The crystal's glow intensified, and suddenly the air around them seemed to vibrate with energy. Adrian felt a strange sensation, like static electricity dancing across his skin. The ship's AI chimed in. "Unidentified energy surge detected. System stabilizing." Adrian's eyes widened. "Kaya, what did you—" Before he could finish, the Sinar fighter tailing them abruptly veered off course, its systems overloaded by the strange energy emanating from the heart. The pilot lost control, and the ship spiraled out of view, disappearing into the swirling gases of the nebula. Kaya opened her eyes, breathing hard, sweat beading on her forehead. I don't know how long I can keep doing that." "It worked," Adrian said, impressed. "We'll take whatever advantage we can get." But the victory was short-lived. The tactical display lit up with new alerts. Larger Sinar ships were moving in. The battleships. These weren't fast-moving fighters. These were capital ships, designed for long-range combat and heavy firepower. And they were closing in fast. "We're about to have company," Adrian muttered, his mind racing. "We can't take them head-on." Rika's voice crackled over the cum. "Adrian, Get to that temple. We'll hold them off as long as we can. Hadrian's stomach dropped. He knew what Rika was implying. This was a suicide mission for his fleet. They couldn't win against the Sinner's superior firepower, not in a prolonged battle. Rika and his men were buying them time, sacrificing themselves for a slim chance at saving the heart. Rika, don't argue with me, Captain. Rika snapped. You have one job. Get that thing to the temple and end this. We'll cover your exit. Hadrian clenched his jaw, swallowing the lump in his throat. Understood. He glanced at Kaya, who nodded silently. There was no time to waste. Setting course for the temple, Hadrian said, punching in the coordinates Kaya had provided earlier. The Horizon's engines roared to life, and the ship shot forward, leaving the raging battle behind. As they neared the nebula, the stars disappeared from view, swallowed by the thick clouds of gas and dust. The ship's navigation system struggled to maintain course, but Hadrian kept a steady hand on the controls. We're almost there, Kaya murmured, her eyes glued to the viewport. Suddenly, the ship's proximity alarms blared again. They're coming, Hadrian shouted. The Sinner must have sent a second wave. Kaya's face went pale. We can't outrun them in the nebula. The interference will slow us down. Hadrian's mind raced. Then we fight. The heart pulsed once more, its light flickering like a heartbeat growing fainter. Kaya gripped it tightly, her eyes determined. We'll make it, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. We have to. As the Sinner ships closed in on the horizon, the nebula's swirling gases obscuring the view, the temple's ancient energy began to stir in response to the heart's proximity. Hadrian pushed the ship forward, straight into the heart of the storm. The horizon plunged into the nebula, the thick clouds of gas and cosmic dust swirling around them like a raging storm. The Sinner ships followed closely, their weapons charging for another volley. Hadrian's knuckles whitened as he gripped the controls, pushing the ship to its limits. Kaya stood beside him, clutching the heart of Velaris tightly. The crystal flickered in her hands, its glow fading and brightening in an erratic rhythm. It was as if the heart was sensing the energy of the temple ahead, the place where it truly belonged. We can't outrun them much longer, Hadrian muttered through clenched teeth. The proximity alarms blared again, indicating the Sinner ships were closing in. Kaya turned to him, her eyes wide with determination. We're close. The temple is just ahead. If we can get inside, the heart might protect us. Hadrian glanced at the sensors, but the nebulous interference made it impossible to see clearly. If we can make it that far. Suddenly, the ship shook violently as a plasma shot grazed their shields. The impact sent a cascade of sparks flying from the console. Hadrian cursed under his breath, frantically adjusting the ship's trajectory to avoid more fire. We need to go faster, Kaya urged, her voice filled with urgency. I can feel the temple calling to the heart. It's like it's pulling us in. Hadrian pushed the engines to full throttle, the ship screaming through the dense clouds of the nebula. But the Sinner ships were relentless, their weapons charging for another strike. Just as another plasma bolt streaked toward them, the nebula parted, revealing an enormous structure looming ahead, a massive temple carved into the surface of a distant, hidden planet. Its spires reached up into the swirling clouds, and ancient energy radiated from its core, casting an eerie glow over the stormy skies. There it is, Kaya gasped. Hadrian didn't waste any time. He veered the ship toward the temple, skimming just above the surface of the planet, as the Sinner fighters continued their pursuit. The temple was their last hope. As the horizon approached the temple's entrance, Kaya's grip on the heart tightened. The crystal glowed brighter, responding to the ancient power emanating from the structure. The air inside the ship crackled with energy. They're going to fire again, Hadrian shouted, but just as the Sinner ships prepared to unleash another volley, the temple reacted. A wave of energy pulsed from the structure, spreading out in a massive shockwave that slammed into the Sinar ships. The attackers faltered, their systems short-circuiting, as they were engulfed by the temple's defensive power. Hadrian stared in shock as the enemy ships were thrown off course, some of them spinning out of control and crashing into the planet's surface. Others managed to retreat, their engines flickering as they disappeared into the swirling clouds of the nebula. They're retreating, Kaya whispered in disbelief. Hadrian exhaled a breath he didn't realize he was holding. That was close. But there was no time to celebrate. The temple's energy continued to pulse, growing stronger with each passing second. The heart in Kaya's hands responded, its glow intensifying until the light filled the entire cockpit. "We need to get inside," Kaya said, her voice filled with urgency. "This is only the beginning." Hadrian nodded and guided the horizon toward the temple's entrance, setting the ship down on a wide platform that jutted out from the temple's base. As they landed, the ship's systems hummed with the residual energy from the temple, almost as if they were being recharged by the ancient power. Hadrian and Kaya quickly disembarked, stepping out onto the platform. The air was thick with the weight of the temple's energy, and the walls seemed to hum with a low, resonating vibration. They hurried toward the massive stone doors that led into the temple's inner sanctum, the heart's glow lighting their way. The doors opened before them, as if sensing their presence, and the two stepped inside. The interior of the temple was vast, filled with towering pillars etched with ancient symbols. At the center of the chamber stood a pedestal, and on it, a faint outline of where the heart of Velaris belonged. Kaya approached the pedestal, her eyes wide with awe. "This is it," she whispered. "This is where the heart must go." Hadrian stood beside her, his gaze shifting between the heart and the pedestal. "What happens when you put it there?" Kaya hesitated, her brow furrowing. "I don't know, but I feel like this is the only way to stop the Sinar." Before Hadrian could respond, the temple began to tremble, and a low rumble echoed through the chamber. The ancient symbols on the walls lit up, glowing with the same light as the heart. "They're coming," Kaya said, her voice filled with fear. "They won't stop until they get the heart." Hadrian placed a hand on her shoulder, giving her a reassuring nod. "Then let's make sure they never get it." With a deep breath, Kaya stepped forward and placed the heart of Velaris onto the pedestal. The moment the crystal touched the stone, the entire temple erupted with light. The walls pulsed with energy, and the ground shook as if the planet itself was awakening. The heart floated above the pedestal, spinning faster and faster as its glow intensified. Kaya gasped, stumbling back as a beam of energy shot from the heart, piercing through the ceiling of the temple and out into the nebula. The beam expanded, forming a massive barrier that spread across the sky, enveloping the entire planet. Hadrian stared in awe. What is that?" "It's a shield," Kaya said, her voice filled with wonder. "The heart is protecting the temple. It's protecting us." But the energy wasn't done. The temple itself seemed to come alive, the ancient machinery within it whirring and clicking as it activated. The power of the heart coursed through the structure, sending waves of energy rippling across the planet's surface. In the distance, the remaining Sinar ships, still struggling to recover from the initial shockwave, were caught in the expanding barrier. One by one, they were engulfed by the energy, their ships dissolving into nothingness as the heart's power obliterated them. The Sinar were defeated. Kaya collapsed to her knees, exhausted from the strain of channeling the heart's energy. Hadrian rushed to her side, helping her to her feet. "You did it," he said, his voice filled with relief. "You saved us." Kaya looked up at him, her eyes filled with gratitude. "No, we did it. Couldn't have done this without you." Hadrian smiled, but the weight of everything they had just been through still hung in the air. "What happens now?" Kaya looked at the heart, now resting peacefully on the pedestal. "The heart will remain here, protected by the temple's power. The Sinar won't be able to reach it. Hadrian nodded, but a thought lingered in his mind. And what about you? Kaya smiled softly. I'll stay here, to protect the heart. It's my duty, my responsibility. My people may be gone, but their legacy lives on in this place. Hadrian's heart sank at the thought of leaving her behind, but he understood. You're sure? Kaya nodded. Yes, this is where I'm meant to be. For a long moment, they stood in silence, the weight of their journey finally settling in. Hadrian knew this was the end of one chapter, but the beginning of something new. The Sinar had been stopped, but the universe was vast, and there were always new threats on the horizon. Take care of yourself, Kaya, Hadrian said, his voice soft but firm. And you, Hadrian? Kaya replied, her eyes glistening. Thank you for everything. With one final look at the heart of Velaris, Hadrian turned and made his way back to the horizon. As the ship lifted off, he glanced out the viewport, watching the temple grow smaller in the distance, now encased in a shimmering barrier of light. Kaya stood at the entrance, watching him leave, the heart glowing behind her. Beacon of hope in the darkness. Hadrian set a course for the stars, knowing that somewhere out there, new adventures awaited. And though their paths had diverged, he would always remember Kaya, the girl from a lost world, who had saved the galaxy with the power of her heart.